Welcome to another episode of the KPMG ESG Experts podcast. In this series of podcasts, we aim to give you more insight into different CSRD-related issues, sharing some concrete steps you could take solving the issues using real-life examples. I want to do a short shout-out to everyone that viewed already and listened before. Thanks a lot for that and for the amazing feedback we got. In this episode, we talk about the EU Taxonomy and how it's related to CSRD, and specifically on eligibility and alignment. We talk about how to navigate all the different documents and regulations and about moving targets. I'm your host, Pieter, but luckily I'm here not alone today. I have some amazing experts with me. So maybe you can shortly introduce yourselves, Vera, Tristan and Gijs. Maybe Vera, you first.
Yeah, thank you, Pieter. So my name is Vera. I'm with Sustainability Reporting Advisory. And my passion, or why I'm so interested still in the field of sustainability reporting, is twofold. One side is because I believe that sustainability reporting creates internal awareness, but also external transparency, and both can be a driver to accelerate sustainability performance, and that is what really matters.
Thanks a lot.
So,
Tristan, we've seen you before, and you're back on the show.
So really happy to be back. Tristan Helsloot, Director Sustainability Assurance within KPMG. Been in the audit profession for almost 18 years, and the last 3 years I've been really focused on sustainability assurance and also reporting. And I have a bit of a specific focus on the financial services sector, as I have a lot of experience there. And 3 years ago I became a father, and really looking at, okay, what kind of legacy do you leave behind, and what is important, and also looking at the biggest challenge that we are facing as a society today. I thought I made the complete wrong choice in a profession as an auditor, but I also found as an auditor we can also contribute to a better world in sustainability, and in that sense I took that step to sustainability assurance and reporting. Haven't regretted it since. I really like the developments and the topic and the conversations that we have with the client, where we are often on a journey together to really explore this continuously developing landscape.
Cool. And last but not least.
Yeah, Gijs, de Graaff, also work in Sustainability Reporting Advisory. And for me, taxonomy in particular, but sustainability in general, is it's really close to my heart. I've had most of my working life had a career in finance, but actually in my teens I did a lot of bird watching and spent lots of my weekends going through investigating ecology. And then I studied science. So taxonomy actually brings those things together in a sweet spot, essentially. So ecology, science-based, and then finance KPIs. So really excited about taxonomy, and I think it's going to be very impactful in the future in how we invest in companies and in activities.
Nice. Yeah, good to have you all here. Maybe for the listeners and the viewers that don't know the EU Taxonomy that well, Gijs, could you maybe give a short introduction on what the EU Taxonomy is and how it relates to CSRD?
Yeah, so essentially EU Taxonomy is a classification system that was introduced by the EU, and essentially it is a way to define sustainable activities, science-based, using the environmental objectives from the Green Deal, and it's meant to help investors direct investments towards sustainable activities. Companies need to report financial KPIs around those activities. And taxonomy has essentially two-step approach. So first you need to determine eligibility as a company. This means which part of your activities are covered by the EU Taxonomy. And then the next step is determine your alignment, and that is looking at the activities that you have identified as eligible and establish whether, according to the taxonomy, you are performing them in a sustainable manner. And taxonomy defines technical screening criteria for each of those activities, and you need to test whether the way that you perform the activities are in line with those technical screening criteria.
So basically it comes down to whether the activities you employ as a company, whether they are potentially, let's say, sustainable at all, and then whether they actually are in the way that you perform them or execute them.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Vera, how does this relate to the CSRD?
Well, the EU Taxonomy and the CSRD are separate regulations, but for all the companies that now will come into scope of CSRD, the EU Taxonomy will apply to them as well. And that is something that we also see in practice that some companies do not seem to be fully aware of, and then EU Taxonomy becomes kind of an afterthought or really pushed back into the project, where taxonomy and CSRD are equally mandatory. So we also suggest to also look at EU taxonomy, at least consider it in the same project.
And maybe to add to that, what we actually saw, for instance, for the larger companies that already have assurance on non-financial information, but not yet on CSRD reporting because they don't have to do that until the reporting year 2024. EU taxonomy might have been in the reporting, but often it was not yet part of assurance.
Okay.
So this would also be the first year that an auditor is going to also provide assurance on those figures and that they're going to have an opinion on those matters. And that is also a change in that sense compared to last year. And indeed, those companies that will be reporting for the first year as of 2025, they will not have any experience with reporting on the EU taxonomy, at least from a regulatory perspective, in the previous years.
Okay. So there's a lot coming at the companies. Some of them have already had a look into this, and some companies maybe less. Also good for the viewers and listeners to know that we will focus first a little bit on looking into the challenges, but don't be afraid. We will also definitely look into like what companies can do to make this journey a bit easier, and we have some practical tips as well at the end. So maybe start with some challenges, right, around the EU taxonomy and how it should be used by companies, or I don't know what is the exact term to be done by companies. The first thing you talked about, Gijs, is eligibility and alignment. You said that eligibility is basically whether a company has activities that are potentially sustainable, right?
Indeed.
That sounds pretty simple. Is it like a list of where are the challenges here in that sense?
Yeah, so the taxonomy defines in total over 120 activities that are potentially sustainable. And actually that number is growing and will be growing. And the first step is to establish whether any of those activities you are performing as a company. And that, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but often companies only do a number of those activities. And so identifying which of those activities are actually done by you as a company. Think about things like, if you're manufacturing cement, or if you are doing real estate construction, and those activities are covered, or if you're generating energy, and those kind of activities are defined, and look for the ones that are relevant for you. And typically you find a few, not 120.
Yeah.
Right. So because then once you know this, then you can actually start to understand where this is relevant for your business. And then alignment is the next step. So understanding your operations and understanding what documentation requirements you have to find or to establish alignment.
Yeah, so if you talk about the eligibility, you have this list of basically eligible activities, right? Is that something really difficult to assess whether because a company, I suppose, knows what they do? Is it for them challenging to find out actually whether they are eligible or not?
Well, yes and no. There's, as with everything, there's black, white, and then a lot of gray in between. So for some of the activities a company performs, it's very straightforward if they do the mapping. What activities do I have? What activities are on the list? And do I have a match?
Yes.
That's essentially the test.
Yeah.
For quite a lot of those activities, it will be very clear that it's either a yes or a no. But then where it becomes a challenge is for those activities where the activity a company performs is not a 100% match with the activity description in the list.
Okay.
And then you come to a point where a company needs to make a judgment call. And we'll talk about it maybe a little bit later on, whether it is or it is not identified as eligible.
Yeah. And judgment call, and I immediately also think about you, think about assurance, Tristan.
Yeah.
You like judgment calls, right, as an auditor, because that's where you can be critical.
Yeah.
So you said that most of the companies that had done some assurance on non-financial information have not included EU taxonomy yet, but some have done this, or have you looked into such a case, for example, already?
Yeah, so there are a couple of companies that have already opted for limited assurance on EU taxonomy disclosures. Good to mention, though, that at least from a Dutch auditor's profession, we've always said the last couple of years, let's try and stay away from that as much as possible. And why is this? Because what we see from the regulation, that the regulation itself is not what we consider suitable criteria on its own. And that is because of these interpretations, because of these gray areas. So the instruction basically that came from the Auditors Association in the Netherlands, and what we discussed was, if you are going to get the question for limited assurance on EU taxonomy disclosures, you have to first determine, are the criteria suitable? And the regulation alone is not sufficient. So part of that assessment of suitability of criteria will also be clear interpretation of the company. And this is exactly where that relates to. So that is something we do at the start of our assurance work. Okay, get a good understanding of, okay, what are those interpretations? Can we agree with those interpretations? And there we often align with our specialists on the topic and what we see in the industry already. And is it properly disclosed when that interpretation is material? And then we can say, okay, together with the regulation and these interpretations, we have suitable criteria and good decisions made, and we can agree with that based on our experience. Yeah.
Let's talk later on a bit how companies can be well prepared for the questions that you might ask them around this. Yeah. Moving on a bit to alignment, maybe I come back to you, Gijs, again. Yeah. So that's basically whether the potential activities turn out to be performed in a sustainable way, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
What are the difficulties for a company to assess this? I suppose everyone wants to have 100% or as high as possible.
Yeah, indeed. But if we all had 100%, then we would have achieved the Green Deal, more or less. So that's usually not the case. In alignment, and maybe I mentioned cement manufacturing. I think that's an example to explain fairly easily. There you, for example, if you're a cement manufacturing company, then the revenue is eligible. But then in order to establish alignment, you need to understand what the, let's say, the GHG emissions are of your manufacturing activities.
Yeah.
And some companies, first you need to know what the emissions are. So do you have that clearly documented? Can you estimate it? But then if you don't meet the thresholds of emissions, then you may actually, in order to be aligned, you would need to change something about your operations.
Yep.
And is that achievable? So I think there's typically two steps. Do we know whether, or do we have the documentation to establish alignment?
Yeah.
And then if we're not aligned, after we've established that, what can we do to change that?
Okay.
And here's maybe the trigger, right? And this is personally also what I find very interesting about this structure, is that where you have cement production and you say, all right, I have 100% eligible activity, but you'll have to report 0% aligned. That is not something that you want to do. It's the opposite from what you're saying, that you want to reach 100%. If you have to show to your external audience, I have 0% aligned, that is not a very good message, because essentially you're saying, I have an activity that I could perform in a sustainable way, but I'm not. And that is the message, and that is the trigger, then hopefully to start investing and changing the way a company operates to actually increase the alignment percentage.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, so the let's say the interesting thing about taxonomy is that if you then make a plan to invest in that activity to actually bring it to alignment, then that investment can also qualify as aligned. And so the idea is that not only you can finance existing activities that are green, but also investments that will help your activities to become green.
Okay.
And within certain boundaries.
Yeah.
So that's the structure of the taxonomy.
Okay, and to understand from the example that you gave around cement production, just for myself, maybe for other viewers also to understand, you say it's eligible activity, right? Yeah. So in this case, what does that mean? It means that the activity could contribute to more sustainability to combat climate change? Or how should I see this?
Thanks. So taxonomy actually has a number of different activities. An activity can actually either be, let's say, an activity that enables industries, consumers, businesses to towards renewable society, essentially. And this is, for example, generation of wind energy and other certain energy efficient technologies. But also what they call transition activities, where basically we know that we need those activities. We know we need cement. And currently there's no, there are some alternatives, but we know that we will need cement manufacturing in the foreseeable future.
From a functional perspective, basically, right?
As a society.
Yeah.
Right? But then if we produce cement, let's at least produce it in, let's say, the best possible way from a GHG emission perspective.
Yeah.
Right? So the taxonomy also helps support those industries that we know we need and that we need for the transition to finance them in a way that they can also become let's say the best possible way to do that.
Okay, and is then the focus fully on climate change?
You
put everything aside? Or
good question. So it's the 6 objectives of the Green Deal. That's also the link with CSRD. Yeah? You have climate change mitigation adaptation, and that's the E1 standard, and then you have pollution prevention control. You have water, marine resources, biodiversity, and circular economy. And there's a link also with the ESRS E standards.
Okay.
And then you also have the minimum social safeguards under the taxonomy, and those link to the S and the G standards.
And that means that they have to minimally be met, or how do I see this?
Yeah, there are certain minimum requirements in terms of social and governance, mostly in relation to, let's say, your supply chain, and that you need to meet as a company to actually also be sustainable.
Okay.
Things like, you need to have a due diligence procedure to avoid forced labor, child labor in your supply chain. There are certain minimum requirements. You need to have measures in place to mitigate those risks and act on it if you identify these instances occurring.
Okay.
Maybe part of the thinking here is a bit of a holistic approach to sustainability, because sometimes a bit of the criticism indeed is around a singular focus on greenhouse gas emission reduction. But for example, if we say, all right, we place a whole field full of solar panels, you could say, well, that is great to kind of mitigate climate change and put in place renewable energy. But if you do that with panels that are produced in certain regions where there's a high risk of child labor or severe human rights issues, and if there's all sorts of materials in those panels that are not produced in a circular way, or if you severely damage biodiversity living in that field, you can argue whether, as a whole, that is actually a sustainable activity. And this is also why the taxonomy is structured in a way that you contribute to one of the objectives that Gijs already mentioned, but doing so in a way that does not do any harm to other elements of sustainability that are equally important.
Exactly, yeah. And regarding these social, regarding in general the environmental and social and governance topics in the EU taxonomy, this is also clearly linked with for example, the topical standards in CSRD, in the ESRSs basically. How should I see this? Because there's so much coming at these companies now in terms of regulations. As you say, the EU taxonomy is a regulation by itself, right? How is this? Is this still manageable? It's a lot, I can imagine.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, and I mean, it's fair to say that it's a lot, right? And the good thing is that you can indeed combine quite a lot of efforts into these two regulations. Gijs already explained that the environmental objectives of taxonomy match the E standards, so the environmental standards of the CSRD, and that a lot of the data that you'll have to collect in order to establish alignment and to report on your kind of the data points within that standard is basically the same effort, or can at least be combined. And what we also see, and Gijs also has experience in that by bringing your taxonomy assessment to the front of your project, or more to the front, you can already collect data and information that can serve science-based or really data-based into your double materiality assessment, because it can be an indication of what is actually important and where do you actually have a good performance already and where maybe not. So maybe this is really material or something to look into also for your CSRD reporting.
Okay, that's a really nice bridge already towards some of the solutions. I wanted to discuss one more challenge, let's say, before we move on to more solution, let's say, examples or guidance for companies to help them out. And that is regarding that it's a bit of a moving target, that things are also changing along the way in EU taxonomy. How do you look at, what do you see in this?
Yeah. I think what's quite interesting, it really is a moving target. I think the regulation is continuing developing. And I focus more on the financial services sector. For instance, last year, everybody was preparing for EU taxonomy. And then a draft commission notice came out quite close towards the end of the year that gave clarity on some of the interpretations and how they should be applied. Luckily, it was draft because it had quite huge implications, possible huge implications on EU taxonomy disclosures. And there you see it's really a moving target. Then you need to determine, okay, is something really a new interpretation? So, and it has such potential impact that we can agree, hey, it is currently draft interpretation, so we don't have to apply it yet? Or is it really a further clarification of what was already in the standard and should you already apply it? And in that sense, we'll be facing such interpretations, clarity from benchmarks, convergence on applications, and more guidance from the regulator in the upcoming year. Yeah. And it's really important that those are picked up right away and determined, okay, what is the impact of this and how is this then applicable to the company?
Because I can imagine that as a company that you also say at some point, all these drafts coming out, other maybe papers from the regulator on how to interpret things, that you maybe say as a company, okay, let's draw a line. We take now the status as is, and for now we move on with that regarding our reporting, regarding looking into EU taxonomy. Is that something that is allowed, or is it a too practical view that I personally have?
Yeah, maybe I can respond to that.
Yeah, feel free.
Indeed, it is a moving target. There's a lot of annexes, 7 annexes that have different activities. We have, you talked about the draft commission notice. It has FAQs. So frequently asked questions. We have 300 plus FAQs. And actually, looking through the FAQs, we still have questions about how to interpret them. So it is tricky. What we always suggest our clients is be clear what you have included, what you have not included. I think when you report, and has just been a document released. I think it's very helpful for the readers to understand whether you have incorporated or not. Essentially, when you report, you should at least be transparent about which guidance you have used for that report and which guidance you have not used.
Yeah.
So we saw some companies being very explicit, like this FAQ we did adopt, this FAQ we did not adopt.
Yeah.
And I think that's very helpful for the readers of the disclosures.
Are the readers then that well informed, you think, or that sounds something I would wonder.
Sorry,
if the reader of this reports, right, that then see this is based on FAQ XYZ and regulation draft ABC, is that for the reader then still understandable what that exactly means, or?
Not well, yeah.
Maybe not for the reader, but definitely for the auditor.
Yeah.
And that is of course for the reporting company also important. and it avoids all sorts of, but Tristan, you know more about this, difficult discussions and then having to dig into all sorts of files and then finding out that you forgot which FAQ was used. So this particular purpose maybe serves the auditor better than the kind of the general reader. But again, in the preparation of the disclosure, it also helps in formulating your text actually better. And that, again, is of the benefit to the reader, because then it becomes a more kind of comprehensive read.
Yeah, about logical story, basically.
Yeah,
is that
hopefully.
what it comes down to? Yeah.
And in the end, I think the investor community, there will be certain people in the investor community that actually can digest this as well.
Yeah.
And then the ultimate purpose is to direct investments through the taxonomy, and there, so certain people in the audience, certain users of the non-financial statements will digest this and will be interested in understanding how the company adopted the taxonomy.
Yeah. I think indeed, as the importance of the EU taxonomy disclosures is growing, when more and more companies are also using this actually to direct their strategy to really, maybe achieve targets on alignment percentage or as such, then it really becomes also important that, if you are an investor, that you can properly compare those figures for those companies, and that real deep context of what did you and did you not apply, and what might be the possible impact of that. That is really something that those investors are also going to be looking at. I think in the upcoming years, regulators, auditors, but also those investors will really be deep diving in proper benchmarks of various companies. Okay, why are these figures these figures, and is it logical that one has a much higher percentage than others, and why is this the case? Now,
So I think in short, we are still in a transition period where these new, let's say, regulations are being implemented by companies, and still these are changing as well. Yeah. And for companies, it's really important to be explicit about what have they based themselves on, right? To the outside world, and also to the auditor, and also to themselves, to get the coherent and logical story. Yeah. Getting a little bit back towards eligibility and alignment that we discussed in the beginning, and all the challenges around that and interpretation. Do you have some good tips, or how could companies approach this best? So whether an activity aligns or not, I think probably companies would also like to avoid greenwashing, or having giving the idea that they might be trying greenwashing. So what kind of guidance can you share?
Should I start and then you? Good point, Pieter. You mentioned greenwashing, because the idea of the taxonomy is the framework consistent to avoid greenwashing. One of the tips that we give to companies is the taxonomy is part of your non-financial statements under CSRD. So make this part of your CSRD project. Look at eligibility early on. Understand where this is. And then check whether, if you have certain eligible activities, like a high revenue in a particular area that is covered by EU taxonomy, and check if that also matches the DMA. And that, if for that activity, say cement, greenhouse gas emissions and energy efficiency is very relevant, you'd expect that to be relevant and be a material topic
for the whole company.
If that is a big activity of you. But also, if you look at the no significant harm, and there are some statements about specific about pollution. Check if you consider those pollution elements also in your DMA.
Yeah. Because these should not be separate exercises.
Indeed.
Basically, right?
Indeed. And that's also how the auditor would look at it. So that it's a coherent story. And then early on, understand where your gaps are with alignments. And then and that is the key part of taxonomy that we advise that you do at the start, or let's say in an early stage of your CSRD project.
Okay. And if there's some questions regarding alignment, or maybe something else you wanted to add, Vera?
Well, I wanted to add that whatever decisions you take, document them well, because you might think that you'll remember what the basis for a certain conclusion was.
Yeah.
But we see very often, and you might all recognize that won't be so often the case. And
You'll
then
forget.
You'll forget. Yeah, you'll forget, and then you have nothing to show your auditor, but also nothing to kind of remind yourself on why did we actually take this decision, and is there ground to maybe reconsider, as also the regulation changed. So whatever you do, I would say document it well, both for yourself and also for the auditor.
I guess that, well, it's for the auditor, so I guess you can live with that, Tristan. What do you do if they have forgot and there's no documentation? What happens then?
I think from an auditor perspective, there's three things we'll be looking at, and the first one is indeed this documentation of the interpretation, and then that assessment. Hey, can we live with it? Can we agree with that? There's maybe some room somewhere, but there's not room everywhere. So what can we agree with, and what can we not agree with? And documentation is really an important basis for that. So that's definitely a focus point. I think from an assurance perspective, really of what is required then is having that interpretation, puts it in the proper control framework, make sure that all the data elements are covered by that control framework, and really don't forget also the important connectivity with financial information. Yeah. Because EU Taxonomy is really about connecting financial information also with sustainability information, so that connectivity with the financial data is really important in the granularity that you also need for the taxonomy disclosure. And I think then last, if I would say a tip, when you're working with your auditor, you have the interpretation is correct, you have your control framework in place, have your auditor look at it in a timely fashion, and also timely create those dummy reporting and do a dry run, really gathering that data and use that to prepare properly and align with your audit. Okay, this is what we expect, these are the calculations in the tables, this is how we've interpreted things, be clear about that, and this is also how we're going to create that context with the information, and this is the information we're going to provide to explain why the figures are these figures.
Okay, good, cool. So I want to round off a little bit, and I wanted to ask you actually to give one specific, let's say, action that maybe companies can start doing tomorrow, or regarding EU taxonomy. Well, you already give a lot of pointers here, Tristan. So I don't know if there was one specific one that you want to highlight, and if not, of course, we can also ask Gijs and Vera what specific action they would like to highlight for companies to take tomorrow to make their EU taxonomy and CSRD journey a little bit easier.
I think the first one is really start early. Yeah. And start with those interpretations, getting them clear. Where are the gray areas and what are our decisions there, and document it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I can second what Tristan is saying and maybe add a bit of nuance. I think absolutely start early, but also be aware that you don't have to do everything early. It's very important to have a good view on the kind of the scale and the intensity of your EU taxonomy project by diving into it early and knowing what you have to do when. And if you start early, you have more time to phase out the different steps than if you start late and you have to do everything in 2 months. And then the question of manageability will potentially be an issue.
Cool. So focus on what to do first instead of trying to do everything in the beginning. Or,
yeah, indeed.
Yeah, maybe to add to that point, so we talked about eligibility. Understand your alignment gap, and then decide what your ambition is to actually close the gap, and make that ambition an integral part of your CSRD project, because you don't have to close the gaps for reporting.
So part of that is also make decisions on what then you want to be aligned on. Maybe.
Indeed. Where do you want to focus? Is it feasible to reach alignment? Yes or no? What is the path towards alignment? Understand that and make that part of your CSRD project.
Yeah. Okay. So in short, it's like start early, be in time, and look at what you should focus on also and what your ambition level is. I think those are the 3 things that people should start with tomorrow.
Nice.
Yeah. Thanks a lot it's already unfortunately finished. I had a great conversation with you, so thanks for that. Thanks for all the people listening to this episode of the KPMG ESG Experts podcast. We hope you enjoyed our introduction into the challenges that organizations face around the EU taxonomy and feel more prepared to take the next steps in your reporting journey. If you're keen to hear more from our experts on CSRD topics, subscribe to our podcast via the link in the description. As always, you can also head over to the KPMG website to sign up to our ESG Today newsletter, as well as to check out articles and events on ESG related topics. See you next time.